Yeah. Okay, yeah, I got it now. All I got is recording right now.
Okay, great. My name is Ilene Flannery Wells. This is my twin brother. His name is Paul Flannery. I think the best way to put this is that he mostly ill before the dangerous standards, before HISLA, before behavioral health came into play, before the recovery movement took over and most everywhere. Paul was admitted to psychiatric unit and became ill and he had a major psychotic break. We do have a history of mental illness in our family. I do think he would have become ill organically, but he was helped with quite considerably with PCP and LSD, which I think caused some brain damage, which I think also caused him to become so treatment resistant. But he was put into the hospital immediately. He wasn't arrested. My parents weren't given the runaround like everyone seems to get today. And then they talked to them about it. They shared information with my parents because they could. And it was in the best interest of Paul and my parents. Unfortunately for Paul, he did not respond to any form of treatment, and he was hospitalized for a long period of time until the insurance cap hit. And my parents were forced with either bringing him home, still no better than the day he was admitted, and having to be trapped, like Jean was talking about, in her own home. What I say today is that people are now held hostage by the behavioral health system. They're held hostage because they are trapped in this cycle of trying to find help for their loved one and hitting those barriers and having to do everything on their own. They are the pill Nazi, like you said. They are the caseworker, the nurse, the med manager, the orderly. Everything that what a treatment team should be, a parent is, and that ruins the family dynamic. It absolutely ruins it. And they are held hostage. I consider the behavioral health system a terrorist organization right now because families live in terror over what's going to happen next, and just the terror of knowing that there's nobody out there that will help them. Now, what we had to do was make a really tough decision, but luckily we could at that time. Paul was committed. That doesn't happen anymore. Paul was committed into the New York State hospital system, and during that time, I was his twin sister, and it was horrible. I thought of it as a prison. Well, it wasn't. It was a hospital. Think about it. He had doctors and nurses, and they tried every medication. He wasn't in jail in these horrible cells. He was on a ward at least. They had televisions, and we could visit him anytime we wanted. There wasn't these horrible regulations that the jails have. And in the jails, they don't medicate them half the time. They don't treat them half the time. And if they do, it's not very good. Or they throw them into solitary confinement, which makes them worse. We didn't have that. At the time, I didn't understand it. I thought it was horrible, and I wanted him out. And my mother knew better. And she talked to the staff at the hospital because there was no HIPAA. They talked back and forth all the time. My mother was there every week. She drove an hour upstate to the hospital every week, twice a week sometimes. And those people knew. My mother we had 10 children in my family. My mother knew how to rule our household. She ruled that state hospital too. And they don't allow that anymore.
That's advocacy.
They think family members are part of the problem, and what they shouldn't be. They should be partners to the solution. So, what is this? Repeal the IMD exclusion. Does anybody know what the IMD exclusion is?
No.
You do.
I do.
All right, so when Medicaid was enacted in 1964, there are all these people in the state hospitals, right? And at the time, all the states were taking care of them as part of the charity and all of that. So they became the hot potato of the money, right? So the feds decided they weren't going to pay for it. So they decided that no federal Medicaid matching funds would go to any psychiatric hospital. Think about it. So what did they do? They closed the hospitals. Because then they could get the Medicaid funding, matching funding in the community. Now, along with that was the Community Mental Health Bill of 1964. So those went hand in hand. And his goal, JFK's goal, was to get the people who could live in the community. Because there were people warehoused in the state hospitals that could very well live on their own with good support. But in his ideals were that there would also be hospitals that would be part, or wings that would be part of regular hospitals, and standalone smaller hospitals, and that didn't happen. It's partly because of the Medicaid ID exclusion, and partly because of the Vietnam War, quite frankly, and money's ran out. And the NIMBY group, not my backyard. I don't want a group home there, all these crazy people. You know, so what did they do? They closed the state hospitals, and you can see a direct correlation. The number of people that went down at the state hospitals, the number of people that became homeless and incarcerated, as starting from 1964. So we thought we had our champion in Congress, Tim Murphy, and he tried. He got something through. Maybe we'll get some hippie reform. It's not in the bill. Now it's all still a discovery and everything. We have this assistant secretary who hopefully she has really said some things about SAMHSA that needs to be improved. But we need to get this IND exclusion repealed. The IND exclusion right now, there's a lot of carve-outs, but basically, if you're a standalone facility that has 24/7 care, that's greater than 16 beds, that more than 50% of your population is their primary illness, is a mental illness or drug abuse, addiction, you're an institute for mental disease and you do not get any federal Medicaid. That's discrimination. Now, NAMI's been writing about this on their website all these years. I've gone back 20, 30 years, all this talk about it, and nothing's being done. And it's because they think that, well, we'll take care of the people who can help themselves. We'll take care of this, that, and the other thing. We'll make sure that they get help in jail. Well, no. They shouldn't be in jail in the first place. So one of my big soapbox things is to talk about the IND exclusion. Most people don't even realize it exists. So I never write things down. I always talk extemporaneously, so I just lost my train of thought. But the other thing that goes along with this is the Olmstead decision. 1999 Supreme Court decision that said that people have the right to live in a community in the least restrictive environment possible. And what people forget is that possible part, right? Paul couldn't live on his own, yet when he was released, because he was too sick for a group home, no group home would take him, they were going to put him in his own apartment. Hello, have you met my brother? 32 years, well at that point it was like 25, not one lucid day. He thought he was James Bond, Clint Eastwood, professional football player. He had a camera embedded in his head. You name it. But he wasn't sick. There was nothing wrong with him. I'm transmitting those voices into his head and told him, you're the problem. You did this to me. You know? So the Olmstead decision comes along, and rightfully so, the people that can live in the community with supports, who have the abilities to do some of their own care, with a little bit of help, take care of themselves and live in a community, yes. But for the Pauls of today, as I call them, not necessarily. Maybe more of a, in fact, when Paul got sick with cancer, actually before he was diagnosed, we got him into a nursing home because his smoking, his COPD, his emphysema was so bad. Well, it was after a stay in a hospital. He had pneumonia twice, and they were going to release him back to this god-awful adult home he was in. And of course, at the adult home, they didn't have any kind of supervised activities because these are adults. They can direct they can do whatever they want. We're not going to tell them what to do, right? So they just wander about and do nothing and smoke cigarettes all day. And Paul would have given the shirt off his back for a cigarette, so we bought him cigarettes. Because otherwise, he would give everything away. And he did it anyway. So the Olmsted decision is even, they're going after these adult homes now too, because they're considered, two institutions, and they should be an institution. Well, maybe that's where they need to be. Unfortunately, some people, in fact, in the Olmsted decision, Justice Ginsburg, in her deciding statement, said that the Olmsted decision should not be used as a means to close these hospitals because they are needed for people who are so ill that they need to be in them from time to time. And that's all we're asking for, is enough beds so that we can get the people who are in acute states into these hospitals and where they can get enough time in there to get stabilized and to get the treatment that they need so that they could get back out into the community. And if there are some 20% that never recover like Paul, well, maybe they should stay there. And I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, and it's really difficult sometimes to actually take that position. But when Paul got put into the nursing home, they took a liking to him. He was a very affable guy. He shook everybody's hand. They called him governor. So they decided they would take him in because they could get around the IND exclusion because of his emphysema. And so they admitted him as a permanent resident. And I'm telling you, he was in the best mental state in that nursing home than he ever was since he was released from the state hospital. The best. He had regular meals, he had his vacations on time. At the adult home, I don't know, half the time he didn't get his meds. I don't know what they did with them. They were selling them on the side or something. Or they weren't making sure he took them. They weren't making sure he was eating. One time he told me that, no, he couldn't sit down one time, he told me, because someone was living inside of him and he wouldn't let him sit down and wouldn't let him eat. I think it was his brain trying to explain what was wrong with him, and that's how he interpreted it. So when he was in the nursing home, they had organized activities. They had bowling and they had physical therapy or throwing balls around. They had all sorts of activities. A priest came in. I would love to fly on that wall with him talking to the priest. Some of the bizarre things he would say. And you know what? All that social interaction, even if they were in their 80s and they had dementia, or 60s and had whatever, the hip replacement and all of that, they talked to him like a real person, and he thrived. Now, I don't think people should be stuck in nursing homes if they don't need to be there either, but if that's a place where they can thrive and do well and be the best recovery that they can get to, then I'm okay with it. There's something going around lately about, nursing homes being a problem, and I would say that they're only a problem for the people that don't need to be there. Just like if your grandma can take care of herself in her own home and is doing fine, there's no reason for her to be in a nursing home. It's the same thing. There's somebody with schizophrenia who maybe has insight and can manage their own meds, and I think that's really the key, is that anosognosia is not part of the equation ever when we're talking about how we need to take care of people. I decision boxes. Yes, no. No? Okay, then they go on this path. And you have more of a intense supervised structure and possibly an institution. And I would love to have smaller hospitals or nursing home type facilities where the calls of today could better maybe eventually get to another point. But right now they go from 3-4 days in an ER right back into the street, and that's only perpetuating the problem.